Alright, so we're going to continue talking here about Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. He's been talking about the monarchy, the English monarchy, monarchy in general, as well as hereditary succession. So, the contest for monarchy and succession between the houses of York and Lancaster laid England in a scene of blood for many years. 12 pitched battles, besides skirmishes and sieges, were fought between Henry and Edward. Twice was Henry a prisoner to Edward, who in his turn was prisoner to Henry. And so uncertain is the fate of war and the temper of a nation, when nothing but personal matters are the ground of a quarrel, that Henry was taken in triumph from a prison to a palace, and Edward obliged to fly from a palace to a foreign land. Yet as sudden transitions of temper are seldom lasting, Henry in his turn was driven from the throne, and Edward recalled to succeed him, the Parliament always following the stronger side. So here we see with hereditary succession the uncertainty that comes from man's own personal quarrels, the destabilization that trifling matters can cause. This contest began in the reign of Henry VI, and was not entirely extinguished till Henry VII, in whom the families were united, including a period of 67 years from 1422 to 1489. In short, monarchy and succession have laid, not this or that kingdom only, but the world in blood and ashes. 'Tis a form of government, which the world of God bears testimony against, and blood will attend it. If we inquire into the business of a king, we shall find, and in some countries they have none, that after sauntering away their lives without pleasure to themselves or advantage to the nation, they withdraw from the scene, and leave their successors to tread the same useless and idle round. In absolute monarchies the whole weight of business, civil and military, lies on the king. The children of Israel in their request for a king urge this plea, quote, that he may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. But in countries where he is neither a judge nor a general, as in England, a man would be puzzled to know what is his business. And so we see here, in the words of Scripture, and the words of Thomas Paine, that 'tis a form of government which the world of God bears testimony against, and blood will attend. So in other words, the being that is, all that is, the truth, the divinity, is against such an organization of human society. Not only that, but we have empirical evidence to support this. We have the blood. We have the histories, the wars, to back up our claim. And so he says, if we inquire into the business of a king, we shall find, and in some countries they have none, that after sauntering away their lives without pleasure to themselves or advantage to the nation, they withdraw from the scene, and leave their successors to tread in the same useless and idle round. So in other words, this institution, these people, the business of the king, is this slow, nonsensical, the sauntering, the slow walk, the wasting away of a life without pleasure to themselves, and to themselves or to the advantage of the nation. You would think that if you're not going to do anything for the advantage of the nation, you might as well have fun. But it seems, in this case, in this institution, it is not so. They withdraw from the scene and lead their successors to tread the same useless and idle round. It's this boring, cyclical, non-changing, totalitarian hellscape that leaves humanity dull, insulted, bruised, wanting. In absolute monarchies, the whole weight of business, civil and military, lies on the king, the head of state. The children of Israel, in their request for a king, urged this plea. They wanted a judge, a human judge, and they wanted somebody to fight their battles for them. It's interesting that they wanted a king to judge them, because certainly they had prophets, and the prophets certainly did not hold back their judgment. But it's this some strange pull to this institution, the security, the secular security, the material security, the security against the outside invaders. They want this security to be institutionalized. They want it to be they want their cake and to eat it too, essentially, because if there was no king, they would be responsible for organizing this sort of defense. And certainly it's an anxiety-producing thing to do, I would imagine, to provide for your own safety, especially in the ancient world, if we're thinking about the plight of the Israelites, returning to the homeland, defending themselves against constant attacks. I can imagine that this would be a very tempting thing to say, to erect an institution and sacrifice their freedoms, their liberty, for safety and security. But certainly, once one has safety and security, the longing and the wanting of liberty, I would imagine, would be similar to that of a prisoner sitting in a jail cell, though in this case, the prisoner had done nothing wrong. The prisoner had voluntarily closed the door and violated his own freedom without violating the law. And this is sort of how I see it with the monarchy and hereditary succession, and how it affects the people. But in countries where he is neither a judge nor a general, as in England, a man would be puzzled to know what is his business. In other words, it seems as though this ceremonial position, with such immense power, is undeserved. He continues, the nearer any government approaches to a republic, or some form of representative government, less business there is for a king. It is somewhat difficult to find a proper name for the government of England. Sir William Meredith calls it a republic, but in its present state, it is unworthy of that name, because the corrupt influence of the crown, by having all the places at its disposal, has so effectually swallowed up the power and eaten out the virtue of the House of the Commons, the Republican part of the Constitution, that the government of England is nearly as monarchical as that of France or Spain. So in other words, so they hollow out the Commons, the House of the Commons. The House of the Commons represents the common people. That representation is the very Republican element that is a Republican, that will form a Republican government. It is that representation of the people. Men fall out with names without understanding them, for it is the Englishman glory in the liberty of choosing a House of Commons from out of their own body. So again, to reread that sentence, for it is the Englishman glory, the liberty of choosing a House of Commons from out of their own body. And it is easy to see that when Republican virtue fails, slavery ensues. In other words, when the representation from the body of the common fails, slavery of the commons ensues. Why is the Constitution of England so sickly? But because monarchy has poisoned the Republic, the Crown has engrossed the Commons? In England, a king has little more to do than to make war and give away places, which, in plain terms, is to impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. A pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed 800,000 sterling for a year, and worshipped into the bargain. Of more worth is one honest man to society, and in the sight of God, than all the crown ruffians that ever lived. So, fairly straightforward ending to this section of Mr. Paine's thoughts on the monarchy and hereditary succession. It is clear that he feels that this institution is a useless institution, and moreover than being just useless, it is detrimental, harmful to the commons and to the state of liberty. So this next section, in Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, are on the thoughts on the present state of American affairs. So the important thing here to mention and to remember is that this is a book, or a pamphlet, I guess they call it, that was written in 1776, and this is in support of American independence. Okay. In the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense, and have no preliminaries to settle with the reader, than that he will divest himself of prejudice and prepossession, and suffer his reason and his feelings to determine for themselves that he will put on, or rather that he will not put off, the true character of a man, and generously enlarge his views beyond the present day. Volumes have been written on the subject of the struggle between England and America. Men of all ranks have embarked in the controversy, from different motives and with different various designs, but all have been ineffectual, and the period of debate is closed. Arms, as a last resource, must decide the contest. The appeal was the choice of the king, and the continent has accepted the challenge. It has been reported of the late Mr. Pelham, who, though an able minister, was not without his faults, that on his being attacked in the House of Commons, on the score that his measure were only of a temporary kind, replied, "They will last my time." Should a thought so fatal and unmanly possess the colonies in the present contest, the name of ancestors will be remembered by future generations with detestation. The sun never shone on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest, and will be more or less affected even to the end of time by the proceedings now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith and honor. The least fracture now will be like a name engraved with a point of a pin on the tender rind of a young oak. The wound will enlarge with the tree, and the posterity will read it in full-grown characters. By referring the matter from argument to arms, a new era of politics is struck. A new method of thinking has arisen. All plans, proposals, etc., prior to the 19th of April, i.e., to the commencement of hostilities, are like the almanacs of the last year, which, though proper then, are superseded and useless now. Whatever was advanced by the advocates on either side of the question then terminated in one and the same point: a union with Great Britain. The only difference between the parties was the method of effecting it. The one proposing force, the other friendship. But it has so far happened that the first has failed and the second has withdrawn her influence. So of course here he's saying, in rather poetic language, that they tried diplomacy. They tried to talk it out. Either side of the question then terminated in one and the same point, namely, a union with Great Britain. Great Britain effecting the method of force, and from the American colonies, the method of friendship. England's method of force has failed, and the proposal of friendship has withdrawn its influence. And so you can see two societies, one emerging society and another established order, falling into conflict, falling into war. As much has been said of the advantages of reconciliation, which like an agreeable dream has passed away and left us as we were. It is but right that we should examine the contrary side of the argument, and inquire into some of the many material injuries which these colonies sustain, and always will sustain, by being connected with and dependent on Great Britain. To examine the connection and dependence on the principles of nature and common sense, to see what we trust to, to see what we have to trust to, if separated, and what we are to expect, if dependent. So I'm expecting many of the similar examples that we read earlier in Samuel Adams' piece on American independence. I've heard it asserted by some that as America has flourished under her former connection with Great Britain, that the same connection is necessary towards her future happiness, and will always have the same effect. Nothing can be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We may as well assert that because a child has thriven upon milk, that it is never to have meat, or that the first 20 years of our lives is to become a precedent for the next 20. But even this is admitting more than is true, for I answer roundly that America would have flourished as much, and probably much more, had no European power had anything to do with her. The commerce by which she has enriched herself are the necessaries of life, and will always have a market while eating in the custom of Europe. In other words, the people, the colonists, have left their homeland of Great Britain and have built something sustainable. They do not need this corruptible influence of a European power. They do not need that friendship in order to sustain themselves, to be self-sufficient. He continues, but she has protected us, say some. That she has engrossed us is true, and defended the continent at our expense as well as her own, is admitted, and she would have defended Turkey from the same motives, namely, for the sake of trade and dominion. Alas, we have been long led away from the ancient prejudices, and made large sacrifices to superstition. We have boasted the protection of Great Britain without considering that her motive was interest, not attachment, and that she did not protect us from our enemies on our own accord. Allow me to reread that. and that she did not protect us from our own enemies on our account, but from her enemies on her own account, from those who had no quarrel with us on any other account, but who will always be our enemies on the same account. Let Britain waive her pretensions to the continent, or the continent throw off dependence, and we should be at peace with France and Spain, were they at war with Britain. The miseries of Hanover last war ought to warn us against connections. So, the colonists, the Americans, they get caught up in English conflicts, and if they were separated from England, they would not be enemies of major European nations. They would be friends with them. And the relationship that they had was, although earlier, and certainly the approach of the United States or the colonists, the Americans, to their relationship with England was that of friendship, understanding, the want for a union, the want of a friendship, of some sort of connection. But it appears that what Great Britain was giving was not in the interest of friendship. Her motive was interest, for interest's sake, for monetary gain, to support the lifestyle of the commons and of the nobility in England. It has lately been asserted in Parliament that the colonies have no relation to each other but through the parent country, i.e., that Pennsylvania and the Jerseys, and so on for the rest, are sister colonies by the way of England. This is certainly a very roundabout way of proving relationship, but it is the nearest and only true way of proving enemyship, if I may call it so. France and Spain never were, nor perhaps ever will be our enemies as Americans, but as our being the subjects of Great Britain. In other words, the only relationship that these colonists have are through the connection, through the uniting force of England. And without that relationship, then they wouldn't be any sort of union. So why, from the Parliament's point of view, why would they even want to resist our authority? Because it's within our authority, within our state structure, that holds their relationships together. But, says Thomas Paine, it is the nearest and only true way of proving enemyship. And of course he goes on again to repeat that without their connection to England, France and Spain would never be their enemies. But Britain is the parent country, say some. Then the more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. Wherefore the assertion, if true, turns to her reproach. But it happens not to be true, or only partly so, and the phrase parent or mother country has been Jesuitically adopted by the king and his parasites, with a low papicistical design of gaining an unfair bias on the credulous weak of our minds. Europe, and not England, is the parent country of America. This new world has been the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Hither have they fled, not from the tender embraces of a mother, but from the cruelty of a monster. And it is so far true of England, that the same tyranny which drove the first emigrants from home pursues their descendants still. So here, this is interesting, an interesting opinion that Thomas Paine is laying out, that Great Britain as a mother country is not entirely accurate. That the behavior of England certainly does not demonstrate that of the behavior of a parent to a child. Moreover, their behavior is that of the Jesuits, sort of resistant to Reformation. And it has been adopted by the king and the parasites. And so it is if this is to be considered a parent, this is certainly an authoritarian parent, a parent that suffocates their child, does not allow them to grow, does not allow them to even leave the nest. And he says that Europe, and not England, is the parent country of America. So there he implies that everybody who was persecuted and loved civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe, not just England, came to the United States to live out the way that they wanted to live their lives. They fled here, not from tender embraces from a mother, but from the cruelty of a monster. And it is so far true of England that the same tyranny which drove the first emigrants from home pursues their descendants still, as they are in a state of war. In this extensive quarter of the globe, we forget the narrow limits of 360 miles, the extent of England, and carry our friendship on a larger scale. We claim brotherhood with every European Christian and triumph in the generosity of the sentiment. And so I think we'll stop this episode here for today.